my channel. I'm just doing a quick video because I just wanted to share with you briefly this book here, which I've been perusing today, called Vintage Tea Party. It's by Caroline Caldecott. It's a book I got. I'll just put it there. It's a book I got about a year ago, but I've only just properly started having a look at it. I just wanted to share it with you because it's something I'm interested in, which is vintage teas. I'm very interested in sort of anything vintage really, retro, nostalgic, oldie-worldy, and obviously I'm interested in food, as I have been all my life. I live and breathe food, but particularly kind of vintage food and just the whole vibe, and obviously I love cooking and baking and things. So I've just been looking through that book and making some notes really of things that I'd like to make. So I just thought I'd go through some of the things I've written down that came out of that book. It basically, the book, by the way, covers a tiny little bit of the history of afternoon tea. It doesn't go into history of afternoon tea in great detail. It just covers a small amount of the history, which I already know anyway, but it's nice to kind of go over it again. I can, even though I already know it, I just love going over it again because it's just just kind of makes me feel good. My namesake, Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, back in the 1840s, allegedly began the institution of afternoon tea when she had a sinking feeling at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because at that point in time there was a very, very long gap between breakfast and dinner, and a very light lunch, what was called luncheon, but the luncheon was very, very light, not very substantial, so she had a sinking feeling at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and asked her servants to bring her, she was a lady, to ask her servants to bring her some bread and butter and some light cakes for her to eat in her private rooms. And then this then became very fashionable among other ladies once words got out, and because she was a lady in waiting to Queen Victoria as well, then that afternoon tea as an institution very much took off with Queen Victoria and all the ladies around her, and then in fashionable society it kind of very much became a thing. So yeah, obviously afternoon tea nowadays can be enjoyed by anyone of any status, but back when it began, it was very much for the well-to-do, because tea was incredibly expensive at that time as well. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background of the beginnings of afternoon tea. But so I took some notes of. I particularly like to try a tea called Formosa Oolong. I have had oolong tea before, but not for quite some time. And oolong, they don't sell it in all shops, so I might have to get it online. It's called Formosa Oolong. Now, oolong is actually a partially fermented tea, so it's in between black and green tea, and it's recommended that you just drink it as it is, without milk or any adornments. It's a Chinese tea, but you can get a particular type of oolong that's scented with rose petals, and that's meant to be especially good with meringue, so I'd really like to try that one. Some of the things I'd like to make, as I was looking through that book, is there's a very nice recipe for shortbread in there, and shortbread, by the way, happens to be one of my favourite biscuits. I don't consume it that often. I mean, it's very rich and buttery, but so it is quite a treat. It's not something I'd have that often, maybe just once or twice a year sort of thing. But I really would like to make it at some point, because I have made it, but not for a really long time, because normally I get the shop bought one, which is nice, but obviously nothing beats homemade. So yeah, so I've got that to make at some point. Definitely like to make that. I'd also like to make chocolate meringue cake. There's an interesting recipe in there for chocolate meringue cake, and not as difficult as it sounds actually. It didn't look too difficult, and I'd like to make that. Very decadent with cream and strawberries and things like that. There's a recipe for a am I pronouncing this correctly? Genoese sponge. I think that's right. Genoese. Is that spelled Gen or is it Genoese? I think it's Genoese, isn't it? I can never pronounce things properly. Someone please enlighten me, because I feel really quite stupid, but it's just I always forget how to pronounce things, so I can never remember how to pronounce things. Is it No, it's Genoese, isn't it? Genoese. I'm going to have to Google this. G-E is after the place. G-E is after Genoa, and I can never pronounce. Yeah, it must be Genoese then. Yeah, it must be. I can never remember how to pronounce things. So yeah, forgive my ignorance if I pronounce it completely wrong. I think it's Genoese, yeah. Genoese, it is Genoese, it must be Genoese. I don't know, there's a kind of lack in my brain when it comes to remembering how to pronounce things. I can never remember. It's Genoese, I think. A Genoese sponge for a Swiss roll, which I'd like to make that at some point. That's just like basically a basic sponge to make a sort of Swiss roll with. And it talks about high tea. Now it's making me really hungry. High tea is different to afternoon tea because it's a more kind of laid back affair, which was traditionally served around sort of 6 o'clock, so at the end of the working day. It was kind of not as posh as afternoon tea, so it's like an everyman's tea, a kind of like, you know, a kind of, yeah, just for the everyday person. It wasn't like a posh tea in any way. It was just, basically, it was like a big meal at the end of the day. People came home from work tired and needing to have, say, you know, something quite hearty. And so it was called, obviously, high tea because tea was the big event. You know, they would drink a lot of tea, and it was often like quite a strong tea, like Assam. And it would include things such as Welsh rabbit, which is a kind of posh version of cheese on toast, really. Boiled eggs with bread and butter, pork pie, salad, crumpets. They might have coffee and walnut cake and seed cake after that. There's a recipe in a book for easy potted salmon, which is very easy. It just basically involves tinned salmon that you kind of blitz up with kind of melted butter and a few other items. And you can spread it on toast. You might have cheese and pickle sandwich as a high tea, coffee and walnut cake. And in the winter time, you might have date and walnut cake. And you might also have something like a green tea toddy, which is green tea mixed with alcohol and lemon and honey. I mean, that sounds good to me. I don't drink alcohol at all. I don't like alcohol, but I can make a alcohol-free version using fruit juice, actually. That could be quite nice on a cold day. For summer tea, you might have, for an afternoon tea that is, if you're having it in the summer, you might have something like watercress and tomato sandwiches or rye bread. The author recommends rye bread and sunflower seeds for that. There's a recipe in there for a perfect cucumber sandwich on brown bread, you know, obviously with the crust removed, very dainty. There's a recipe for butterfly cakes with buttercream, which I really, really want to make at some point. I made butterfly cakes last year, I made orange curd ones, but I really want to make ones with buttercream. There's something so nostalgic about butterfly cakes. I always think about summer fetes, you know, and childhood nostalgia. When I was a kid, I often went to quite a few summer fetes because we got in a countryside, like, you know, we're going to open up fetes and things, open up gardens and things, so I have fond memories of butterfly cakes. It has very kind of like, I don't know, sort of like childhood nostalgia, it's very vintage vibes, and I just really want to make some as well. They're just so cute, I love butterfly cakes. There's a recipe in there for meringues with raspberries, rosewater meringues with double cream. It didn't look too difficult. I always find meringues sometimes quite tricky to make, but I really want to try and make them more as well, just to challenge myself, because obviously homemade meringues, nothing beats them. Again, you can buy them in the shops, but homemade meringues are so much nicer. I really want to make that at some point. There's a recipe in there for Victoria sandwich cake. Also, by the way, if you want to have something nice on toast, consider making cinnamon sugar. Dead simple. All you do is just simply mix a little bit of ground cinnamon and golden custard sugar and sprinkle it on toast. If you want to make a nice winter sandwich, a winter sandwich recommendation, I mean, obviously you could have this any time of year, but it's, she calls it a winter sandwich. Grated cheddar, grated apple, and chopped walnuts with mayonnaise. That sounds nice. Now, here's the thing about muffins, and I'm talking here about the English muffins. Now, if you're in America, I think it's a bit of a sort of confusion around muffins, because obviously in America, they're completely different to the British ones. So American muffins are kind of more like cake, so it's like a sort of sweet cake, really. Yeah, cakey. Whereas the English muffin is a yeasted bread. It's made with yeast. It's more like bread, but so there is a difference there. So if you're American, I'm not talking about the American muffins here. I'm talking about English muffins, which is kind of more like a yeasted bread that you typically toast and have buttered or spread with jam. That's the ones I'm talking about here. Now, I have actually been consuming muffins completely wrong, because when I make them, and I usually just get short-bought ones, but I really want to make homemade muffins, and there's a recipe in here for homemade muffins. They're not actually that difficult. They're easy to make for crumpets, because with crumpets you need a special crumpet rings, which maybe I will make at some point, but I've been putting off because it looks a bit faffy and I'll have to get some special wings to make it. Maybe one time, maybe at some point I will. But muffins look easier to make because you don't need any like special equipment, you just need a frying pan. And they look actually pretty easy to make. Obviously I've got yeast in them and need to rise a bit. But yeah, I've been actually consuming muffins all wrong because how I make them, and I'm sure this is how many people make them really, toast them I should say, because obviously I always buy shop-bought muffins, is I cut them in half with a knife and then I toast them and then I butter them. But that's doing it all wrong apparently. What you should do is you should not use a knife to cut them in half, but instead you should heat them whole without slicing them in half. Just heat them up without slicing them in half, and then afterwards you should use your hands. You should then tear them in half with your hands. Never use a knife, apparently. And then you should put a big wedge of butter between the two halves, and then gently press the halves together, allowing the butter to melt into the muffin. So that's the correct way of doing it. So I need to try that. And I need to also make my own homemade ones. There's also a recipe here for Madeira cake, there's a recipe for Dundee cake. Dundee cake is made more around sort of like Christmas time. I've had shop-bought ones, I really want to make my own one now. And there's also recommendations here for, actually I'm just going to move over to video number 2 now so this video doesn't run out of me. So I'm moving over to video number 2.